Hello and welcome. We will be doing another Java set review today. This one will be for Java set 4. Question 1. For every odd number between 0 to 100, which of the following Java code snippets will give the correct output? So let's just go down these one by one here. Int num is 0. While num is less than 100, we want to print out if num is not even. Because remember, we can use the modulus 2 to determine quickly if a number is odd or even. So we have num modulus 2 is not equal to 0, which is saying if the num is odd, essentially. And then we do that, and then after every iteration, we increase the num. So far, that's looking pretty correct. Let's look at the other ones just to be sure. So right here, everything is the same except num plus plus is within the if statement. Now, this will end up with an infinite loop because once we hit an odd number, it will, once we hit an even number, it'll stop incrementing num and it will enter an infinite while loop. So it cannot be B here. And C, it looks really similar to A, except we don't have a curly brace at the end of the while statement. And if you remember the rules with loops and braces is you can omit the curly brace in Java. However, what that will do is it will only execute the line after that while. So in this case, the user omitted the curly brace, which means that we can still hit this if statement. However, it'll this num plus plus ends up being outside of the while. So don't let the indentation trick you here, because in terms of how Java sees it, the num here is outside the while loop. So just like the problem with B, this will enter an infinite loop. So can't be C. So looks like A is our answer here. Number 2, find the output for the given program. Okay, so we have num is 0, and while num modulus 5 is 0, so while num is divisible by 5, and while num is less than 20, we want to print out the number and increment. So real quick, one important thing we need to keep in mind here is that in Java, when Java evaluates if statements, it does so in a way where if the if statement is using an AND operator, then it'll exit the if statement early on if it detects something that is already false. So if the first statement, if Java finds out that it is false, it won't even reach the second one, because Java will automatically interpret the entire statement as false and it won't even get to that. So that's something important to keep in mind here. So so let's look through this. So we have num starting at 0. So that means we will first print out 0 and then increment num. So now num is equal to 1. And now it'll 1 modulus 5 is not 0. And if you remember what I said, it won't even look at the second part, and it'll only evaluate this. And because this is an AND operator, the entire while statement will ring false, and it will essentially exit the while loop. So the answer here is actually none of the above, because this will only print out 0, and then it'll hit this first part of the while statement, return false, and then exit the while loop. All right, number 3, for the given program, find the output by selecting the correct option. So once again, we have a num starting at 0, and while num is less than 10, and if once num is at 7, we want to hit continue, And then we also want to print out an increment num. Now, really quick, one important thing about continue that we have to keep in mind is the continue statement in Java is this basically tells Java to skip to the next iteration of the loop. And what that ends up doing is writing continue, it'll force the program back at the start of the loop, and any kind of code underneath that is part of that loop will get skipped as well. So let's keep that in mind while looking at this. So we have a num starting at 0, and we're going up one by one. So once num will hit 7, we hit continue. So then we jump back up to here. We ignore these two lines. We jump back up to the top here on this while statement. And then we check again. And this time, because we skipped these two, the num counter stayed at 7. So what's actually going to end up happening here is we're going to hit a timeout error, because it'll, just like the last question, it'll enter an infinite loop of constantly checking 7 and then continuing and jumping back and then checking 7 and then going back over and over. So we have C here as our final answer. Number 4, from the flowcharts given in the options below, identify the one that corresponds to the basic structure of a for loop. Okay, so let's make this a little bit bigger. So let's look at A first. And maybe I can make this a little bit bigger. So A, we have start initialization, and then we check the condition. So let's actually review really quick what a for loop consists of. So like, let's just int I equals 0. So this is a really basic for loop that iterates from 0 to 9. So we have the first part, which is the initialization. That happens first. And then the second part is the condition, which it checks. This basically allows the for loop to eventually exit by checking the condition. And then after every single check, we want to run the increment. So the first part here, we have the initialization, which is gray, and then we enter the condition. And then we enter the loop body, and then looks like we go from the body to the condition. So A looks almost correct. However, we are missing the iteration, or I guess in this case, the counter needed, because after every condition check and in the body run, we need to hit back to the counter and increment it. So A is missing that one key part. So the answer cannot be A. Let's see. B here. So we have the same thing, except this time it does hit after the body, it hits the counter and brings it back to the condition. And this looks more correct because like I explained earlier, after the condition and after it hits the body, it'll go back to the top. It'll increment it and then go through it all again. Option C here looks like it's that, except they want to bring the counter back to the initialization. So that's wrong, because the initialization will only happen once. So this I equals 1 will only, it'll only run the first time. So it can't be C. And then the last one here, we have the body condition and then true. Now that's just not right either. And there's nothing with the counter. So can't be D. So final answer here would be B. All right, number 5, for the program given below, how many times will hello world be printed? So we have a while system out dot printf hello world equals null, and while num less than 5, we want to print out hello world and increment num. So one really important thing we need to keep in mind here is what is the printf and what does it return? Because it looks like it is checking the return of the system out dot printf and checking it against if it's null or not. And so this will just require a basic understanding of what printf does. And basically what printf does is it returns something called print string. Now, we'll be going over later exactly what this is, but for the purposes of this question, we just need to know that print stream is a Java object, and that gets returned when we call the printf. So because this is an object, it does return something which is not null, right? It's not null, it is type print stream. So what will end up happening here is it will call this, which ends up printing out hello world. And then that returns a type print stream, which then we check. And that print stream is not null, it is a type print stream. So just like when I explained earlier how Java, when you have a and here, Java will exit early and not even check the second part. So once it hits this, it'll immediately, it'll ring false, and then it will exit the while loop. So because of that, we only end up printing hello world once, which is printed out here. So we never end up touching anything down here. So the answer here is B. Number 6, what will be the output of the following program? So we have a basic for loop with empty values in here. And while initially this may look like just a typo, like a syntax error, this is actually valid Java code. Because remember, the structure of a for loop is 3 things, right? Like the beginning of the counter initialization, the condition, and then the counter increment or decrement or whichever. And these are not required technically under the scope of Java syntax, though what is required is the actual semicolons in here. So this would actually be valid. It'll just have empty, it won't do anything inside here. And then one important thing to note here is that what this will end up doing is this will essentially be the same thing as just saying while true. This is just an infinite loop that'll keep on running. And that's because in the middle option here, we do not have any type of exit condition. There's no condition to check to exit the for loop. So because of that, this will just keep on running forever. So answer here is B. Okay, number 7, find the output of the given program. Check the for loop body to determine what the code does exactly. Okay, so we have a string s, hello. And then we have I, which starts at 0, and then we have int j, which starts at the length -1. And just from a quick look at this code, it looks like what it's attempting to do is iterate through the length of the string, or I guess the length of the string besides the last character, and then swap the first and last, and do it over and over again, like swap H and the second L, and then swap, and just keep on swapping. Now, while this initially, it looks legit, one little thing we have to keep in mind is these are, while a string is, under the hood, it is a array of characters. We cannot use a string like that. And so calling s of j is not how you call a string. The compiler will complain. Now, if we wanted to fix this, we would have to convert string s into a character array. So we could use something like toChar array or any type of method that it converts this into an actual array of chars. But we can't actually just treat it like an array itself and then call these bracket values like that. So 7 will be D, none of the above. It'll hit a syntax error. Eight, which of the following statements is correct? So let's just go through these one by one here. Putting a for loop. So let's just actually write it down so we know what we're talking about. So it says putting a for loop inside of a body of a while loop. So like something like this. Okay. Or vice versa is considered valid nesting iteration. Okay. That is actually true. There's no rules saying that nested loops have to be of the same type, even though we're used to that, and even though that's in a way pretty standard for how we do things, it's not required. So all this does is it'll just run the for loop once for every single time in the while loop. Number B, or letter B, for every iteration of the outer loop, the entire body of the inner loop must be executed before the outer loop moves on to the next iteration. So this is also true, because that's essentially just describing the basic workings of how nested loops work. For every single time the outer one runs, the inner loop must run completely once, and then this will increment. So that's true. C, loops can be nested inside each other as many times as needed. Yeah, and that is also true. There's no rules in Java telling us how many maximum nested loops we could have. Now there is, if there are memory constraints in Java, where if we use up too much of the memory, we could hit, Stack Overflow or like memory overflow errors. So that's something to keep in mind. But with that, besides that, that bounds, we can put nested loops as many times as we need. So C is correct. So the answer here is going to be all the above, D. Number 9, the program given below prints a half pyramid in reverse, which is given below. For the code given below, using nested for loops, fill in the blank part so that the program executes successfully. Okay, so it looks like it's just printing out, starting at a number and then printing out one less star each time, all the way to 1 star. So outer loop, we start at 5 and go all the way down to 1. So this is making sense because we're starting at 5 stars and going all the way down to 1. And so the inner loop, basically what we want to do is the inner loop will be the loop responsible for printing out the stars. And how many stars do we want to print out? Well, we have I, which is telling us exactly how many stars for that time. So when I is equal to 5, we want to print out 5 stars. So what would that look like? Well, let's just go over these. So J is 1, J is less than or equal to I, J plus plus. And that looks about right, actually, because we have the counter at 1, and then I is telling us how many stars we want to print out. So J is less than or equal to I, and then J plus plus. But let's just go over the rest of these. So we have J is equal to I. Okay, so we have 5, starting at 5, and then J is less than 1. So this will never even hit the first time because we're saying if 5 is less than or equal to 1. So it can't be B. C is J is less than I over 2. That doesn't really make sense because we want to print out the stars as many times as I. So that should be just I. And then same thing with D. The J, we want to start it at 1 because we're counting up, and it looks like they're counting down and then starting at 1/2, and then yeah, this will not even run the first time, so it can't not be D. So answer here is A. All right, last question here. The program given below is the code for bubble sort. A simple method for sorting numbers in increasing order. For the given example, there are 5 numbers that have to be arranged. Calculate the number of comparisons that will take place during execution in order to arrange the numbers in increasing order. Okay, so let's actually kind of write this out, because we're counting the amount of times we check for or compare two numbers. Yeah, we're calculating the number of comparisons. So the best way to handle this is just to kind of just trace through the code. So I'm going to rewrite the array here. Okay. So let's see. Let's just keep track of it for each iteration of I. So let's say I equals 0. How many comparisons are we making? So we have j's at 1, j is less than n minus I, and n is just the length. So 5 minus 0 is still 5. So this first time we're going to go from 1 to less than, so 1 to 4. And essentially what this if statement is doing is it's comparing the two numbers at j and then j minus 1. So j starting at the second element. So it's comparing this and this. And if it's not in ascending order, like if the right side is less than the, or if it's less than the left side, then we want to swap them. And that's where the comparison takes place. So let's trace through this. So we're going to hit, the first comparison will be between 21 and 45. So that's 1. And then we're going to move over and shift j by 1. So now j and j minus 1 are these two. And we're going to check for these. And these are actually out of order. So it's going to swap these, 34 and 45. That's another comparison. And now check these two. So 45 and 51. Now these are already in order, but this still does the check. And then the last thing here, 19 and 51, this is out of order. So it's going to swap those. And that'll be another comparison. And that is the end of that iteration. Okay, so that's kind of the general pattern. You can start noticing a pattern of how this sort works. Now I is equal to 1. So let's just write down comparisons. Now I is 1, but this time we're only going up to, instead of going to the last one, we're going to go up to only these 4, because the condition for the inner loop is if j is less than n minus I, and as I increases, we decrease how far extended we go in the loop. So now we do the same thing. We compare these two. So that's 1. And now we compare these two again. That's 2. Now we compare these two. Now these are out of order, so it'll swap. So 3 comparisons here. And now we're at the end of that, because again, we're not hitting the last one anymore. So now we increment I is 2. Okay. So now we're going to go through these 3. 21, 34, that is correct. One comparison. 34, 19, that needs a swap, as well as another comparison increment. And now we're at the end of that, because we're only going to go up to the first 3. So now we hit back to the outer loop. So this is 2 comparisons. All right. So now we're going to check only these 2. This looks like it's going to be our last iteration of the outer loop. So we're going to check these 2. Now these are also out of order, so 19 and 21. So we're going to swap that. And now that hits the end of that inner loop now, because j is now equal to 1, and then n minus 1 is also equal to 1. So that'll actually hit false. And essentially, we no longer are inside the inner loop. So that will exit both loops now. So how many comparisons do we have? We have 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1. So that'll add up to 10 total comparisons. Answer is B. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in. As we mentioned before, you can always double check your answers and look up these video explanations made by myself over at the YouTube, as well as look at any kind of links. All the links we have are also online, so this is where you can check that out. So yeah, thank you very much.